All right, Kelly, we're back on the record. All right, ladies and gentlemen, both the state and defense have rested. At this point in time, the state wants to call additional witnesses if they wish. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Dr. Don Huey in rebuttal.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, these witnesses will be called in rebuttal.
Go ahead and have a seat for me. Go ahead and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony shall give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may lower your hand. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Don, D-O-N, Huey, H-U-G-H-E-Y.
All right, Dr. Huey, I'm going to ask you to speak up a little bit so everyone can hear you. And please tell the jurors where are you employed?
Georgia Regional Hospital, Atlanta.
And how long have you been employed there?
31 years. What's
your position?
I'm the forensic director and a forensic psychologist.
Okay, can you speak up for me a little bit? Maybe that,
yes.
I'm sorry if I'm just having difficulty hearing you.
Is the microphone on?
Yes, thank you.
Microphone's on.
All
That's
right.
very good.
Can you tell the jurors what is your position at the Georgia Regional Hospital?
Yes, I'm a forensic psychologist and the forensic director.
And please explain to the jurors a little bit about your education and training in that field.
Yes, I have a Bachelor of Psychology from Georgia State University, a Master's in Psychology from West Georgia University, and a Doctorate in Psychology from Saybrook University.
Can you explain to the jurors a little bit about any sort of clinical training or fellowships you've done in your field of psychology?
Yes, I completed a pre-doctoral psychology internship and a postdoctoral psychology fellowship at Georgia Regional Hospital with clinical and forensic rotations.
What is Georgia Regional Hospital?
Georgia Regional Hospital is a psychiatric hospital that services Metro Atlanta. We have 130 forensic psychiatric beds plus adult mental health beds.
Are you licensed to practice in the state of Georgia?
I am.
And how long have you been licensed?
25 years.
Okay. What, if any, teaching have you done in the field of forensic psychology?
I am on adjunct faculty at Emory University School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry and Legal Services. I supervise forensic psychology fellows and provide training. I was also an adjunct faculty at Argosy University from 2001 to 2003, teaching psychological testing and group therapy. And I have taught courses for continuing education through Department of Behavioral Health on issues of criminal responsibility and malingering.
All right. What does your current practice consist of?
As the forensic director, I'm responsible for 130 forensic psychiatric beds, 3 community integration homes for people who have been found insane at the time of the crime returning to the community, 4 outpatient evaluation teams, and I supervise a staff of psychologists.
How large is that staff of psychologists?
Through direct and indirect reports of psychologists and counselors, I supervise about 45 people.
45 people, okay. Dr. Huey, have you ever done a criminal forensic evaluation?
I have.
And explain to the jury, what's a criminal forensic evaluation?
A criminal forensic psychological evaluation would be something that has been requested by the court to answer a question such as, is someone competent to stand trial? Was someone responsible for their crime at the time? Or do they pose a risk for violence?
And how many of those criminal forensic evaluations have you performed during the course of your career?
Around 2,000.
2,000 evaluations?
Yes.
And have you performed evaluations at the request of the state?
All of my evaluations are by court order.
Okay, by court order?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I'm not asking for numbers, but can you tell the jurors how are you compensated for your work at Georgia Regional? Are you
I'm paid a salary.
You paid a salary? Okay. Are you paid by the hour? Do you ever bill by the hour for the work that you do?
No, it's a flat salary.
Okay, that's not how that works?
Correct.
Okay. Have you been previously qualified as an expert in the Superior Courts of Georgia in the fields of psychology and forensic psychology?
I have.
How many times?
About 150.
150. Have you been accepted as an expert at each one of those times?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I move to qualify Dr. Huey as an expert in the field of psychology and forensic psychology.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, he'll be considered as an expert in this field. Thank you, Ms. Anson. You may proceed.
Thank you. Dr. Huey, can you just explain to the jurors briefly what's your protocol for doing a forensic evaluation to someone?
Well, since I work by court order, I begin by receiving and reviewing the court order to look at the parameters of what the court is asking me to answer. After I do that, I then need to get all the information possible to answer the question asked by the court. That would normally mean reviewing indictments, police reports, victim witness statements, any tape-recorded interviews of the defendant around the time of his arrest. Additional information is needed, such as psychological testing, prior medical and psychiatric and psychological records.
All right. And are you familiar then, during the course of doing these evaluations, are you familiar with what the legal standard is for finding someone not guilty by reason of insanity in the state of Georgia?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And what is that standard?
Georgia has two prongs for criminal responsibility. One is the right from wrong prong.
Can you explain that, please?
Yes. The first one has to deal with whether a person shall be found guilty of a crime if at the time of the act, omission, or negligence constituting the crime, the person did not have mental capacity to distinguish right from wrong in relation to such act, omission, or negligence.
All right. And can you interpret that? What's the time period that you're looking at to determine whether someone knew right from wrong?
I need to know their mental state at the time of the crime. That is the most important legal state.
Okay. And what's the other standard that Georgia uses?
The other standard is something called a delusional compulsion. A delusional compulsion is defined as a person shall not be found guilty of a crime when at the time of the act, omission, or negligence constituting the crime, the person, because of mental disease, injury, or congenital deficiency, acted as he did because of a delusional compulsion as to such act which overmastered his will to resist committing the crime.
All right. And is that just, those are the standards that you keep in mind when you do evaluations?
They are.
Okay. And can you describe how is it that you evaluate the mental capacity of an individual to distinguish right from wrong at the time of a crime?
I need to understand, first of all, whether or not they had a mental illness, since both of these statutes address whether the person had a mental disorder or defect. So information gathered from the person's self-report, information gathered from those who might have observed them around the time of the crime, things they might have written would be relevant in making that assessment.
Is mental illness and legal insanity the same thing?
People can be mentally ill and still be responsible for their crimes.
Is insanity the same thing as mental illness?
Insanity and mental illness may be, well, insanity, first of all, is a legal concept. Mental illness is a clinical concept.
Okay. Can people with a very serious mental illness know the difference between right and wrong?
Absolutely.
Do most people with serious mental illness know the difference between right and wrong?
They do.
Do people with serious mental illness, are you able to evaluate for that?
Sure.
People with a delusional disorder, let's say somebody has a serious delusional disorder, are those people able to distinguish between right and wrong in most cases?
Yes.
How is a delusional disorder, somebody who has delusions, how is that different from somebody who has a delusional compulsion, as you read is the legal standard?
A delusional disorder, or rather just a delusion, since delusional disorder is a separate diagnostic category. Delusions in general mean that somebody holds a false belief that is not contradicted by evidence to the contrary. So they will not let go of that firm belief in spite of evidence that is not true.
Is somebody who has a delusion, is that the same thing as being wrong or perceiving reality in a way that's incorrect?
A delusion is a false belief.
Dr. Huey, can a person, hypothetically, I'll give you a hypothetical, if one doctor diagnosed someone as having the mental illness of bipolar 1 with psychosis, are you familiar with what that disorder is?
I am.
Tell the jurors just very briefly, what's bipolar 1 or bipolar disorder with psychosis?
Well, bipolar disorder, I believe bipolar manic with psychosis, would require several things. First of all, the person has to have a period of at least 1 week where their mood is exceptionally elated, expansive, erratic, irritable. In addition, they must have at least 3 of the following additional symptoms. They have to have problems with distractibility. That means they cannot pay attention or focus.
Let me stop you right there a second.
Yes.
Does having problems with distractibility, such that you're calling it a symptom of this serious mental illness, is that the same as being distracted in a meeting every once in a while?
Not at all.
Okay, what are you talking about when you say distractibility?
The person with bipolar in an acute manic episode cannot stay on topic. So if I were interviewing someone right now and we were answering these questions, they would immediately start talking about my tie. They would talk about the weather. They would jump from topic to topic to topic. They could not stay focused on what I was saying. That would be an example of distractibility seen in acute mania.
Okay, so all of these things, I interrupted you. Go ahead. What was the next symptom that you were describing for the jurors?
Well, the next thing would be impulsive and erratic behavior. They might overspend. They might indiscriminately have sex with strangers. They might do very dangerous things.
Okay, well, let me stop you right there a second. Let me give you a hypothetical. What if somebody has a lot of credit card debt? Is that a symptom of mental illness?
Not at all. 1% of the American population has bipolar disorder. Half are in debt. So
1%?
no.
1% has bipolar disorder. How many are in debt?
At least half.
Okay. So making bad financial decisions, is that a symptom of bipolar disorder?
Not at all.
Okay. All right, go on. What's next?
Next, the person would show grandiosity. That means an extremely inflated sense of self-esteem. Having worked in a psychiatric hospital for 31 years and walking onto the ward, I immediately know when someone with mania has been admitted. They're immediately at the door proclaiming they are God or that they own the building. They're quite grandiose in an acute manic state.
What about when you talk about being grandiose? What if somebody is very accomplished in their field and is recognized for being accomplished in their field?
That is normal.
Is that grandiosity?
No.
What if somebody tells somebody else, I'm real good at my job, maybe I should get another one that pays me a whole lot of money? Is that grandiosity?
Not at all.
If someone who is successful in the business field has a goal to be on the cover of Forbes magazine or Fortune magazine, is that a description of grandiosity?
No, that sounds motivational.
What's the difference between grandiosity and motivational?
Well, with grandiosity, the person believes they are in fact great. With motivation, they're striving to achieve something, such as being on the magazine for doing something good.
Okay. What's the next symptom that you were describing for the jury?
Okay, the next would be something called a flight of ideas. That is where thoughts run through the person's mind faster than they can speak.
I'm sorry, what if somebody's really creative and they have a whole lot of ideas and maybe they have a daytime job but they have an idea about writing a book or something like that? Is that the kind of flight of ideas, a creative person? Is that what you're talking about?
Not at all. A flight of ideas is also associated with the next symptom, and that is increased talkativeness and rapid and pressured speech. Because their ideas are moving so fast, they're trying to talk fast to express those ideas.
Rapid or pressured speech. If someone has been told by court reporters several times that she speaks very quickly in court and to please slow down, is that the kind of pressured speech or hyper talking or hyper speaking that you're talking about?
No. With bipolar disorder, the speech is uninterruptible. So
uninterruptible?
Uninterruptible, yes.
Okay.
So they will talk over others as they're speaking.
And that's the kind of symptom that you're looking for in diagnosing mania?
That is correct.
Okay. What's next?
The next thing would be sleeplessness. People with bipolar disorder may go days or weeks with no sleep whatsoever, or they may sleep a couple of hours and say they feel rested. That is not the same thing as a sleep disorder where the person wants to sleep but cannot fall asleep.
Does staying up late 1 or 2 nights a week, is that the same thing?
Not at all.
Why not?
Well, again, with bipolar disorder, we're looking for evidence of these mood symptoms to persist for at least a week, less if they have to go into the hospital and receive treatment.
What else, Dr. Hewig?
The next thing, I mentioned the talkativeness, would be their behavior. It's going to be increased activity, or there would be evidence of agitation.
And what do you mean by agitation?
Agitation in a bipolar sense would be purposeless behavior. They may just be constantly pacing back and forth for no logical reason.
Okay. Are there any other symptoms associated with mania?
Yes.
What?
In addition to the two categories that I mentioned, there then has to be either significant impairment in social or occupational functioning, or there has to be the presence of psychotic symptoms. Psychotic symptoms would be things like delusions or false beliefs, hallucinations such as hearing or seeing things not there, or having disorganized thought or speech.
Okay. Can a person have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder 1 with psychosis and still be able to tell the difference between right and wrong?
Sure.
Are there different degrees of bipolar disorder?
There are.
Tell the jurors about that, please.
Yes. Bipolar 1 disorder is considered the most severe form of bipolar disorder because the person has a full-blown manic episode with all of those things that I just described.
One of those three things you said to qualify for that is, you said a hospitalization?
Hospitalization, significant impairment in social or occupational functioning, the manic symptoms persisting for at least a week.
Oh, okay.
Then lesser than bipolar disorder would be bipolar 2 disorder, where the person would have some of these symptoms but to a lesser degree, so they would not be as intense.
So maybe wouldn't be requiring a hospitalization, for example?
Correct.
Wouldn't be associated with any sort of psychosis, hallucinations, delusions, stuff like that?
Yes, by definition, bipolar 2 disorder, the person should not have psychotic symptoms.
Okay. Let me ask you another hypothetical then. Can a person who has, is there anything lesser in severity in bipolar than bipolar 2?
There is. There's something called cyclothymia.
What's that?
Cyclothymia is kind of a lesser degree of these symptoms that I named. The person's mood may cycle between being slightly elated and being depressed.
Okay. And of course, please tell the jurors, every person has mood swings, right? Sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad. How are the disorders you're talking about different from people just being happy when good things happen and sad when sad things happen?
The difference is the degree of functional impairment to the person's life.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that for me again?
The degree of functional impairment in their social or occupational life.
Functional impairment in their social or occupational life. What do you mean when you say impairment?
Well, the symptoms that I went over, if somebody is experiencing those, they're not going to be able to function at work, at their jobs. People with bipolar disorder may say that they're creative, but when they're manic, they're not creative at all. If anyone has seen the show Homeland, the character played by Claire Danes, when she gets off...
This is not relevant to talking about an example of a fictional character is not relevant to the definition of Mr. Newman.
Sustained. Next question.
Dr. Huey, do people who are experiencing mania, are they very productive people?
To the contrary, because of their symptoms, they're not able to accomplish a lot. They have a lot of energy, but it's not directed, it's not focused.
But if they're not sleeping as much as they normally would or as other people do, and if they have all this energy, it seems like they would be able to work longer, work harder, that kind of thing. Is that what you see? Differently because it was at the request of the state?
None whatsoever.
Okay.
16, 16, 16, 16, 16, 16, 16, 16, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3,
And
Which-
there
okay.
are those statutes are what are those statute numbers that you refer to?
Okay, 1632 refers to the knowledge of wrongfulness, and the 1633 refers to the delusional compulsion.
Okay, so the right from wrong standard that we just talked about, that was one of those?
Correct.
And then the delusional compulsion statute was the other one you referred to? Okay. So what then did you do in response to receiving that order?
Once I received the court order, I reviewed the information and made sure that I had all the information that was necessary.
And what information did you review?
I reviewed a copy of the court order, the indictment, the police reports related to the murder of Mr. Sneiderman. I reviewed psychological evaluation reports written by Dr. Adriana Flores, Dr. Tracy Marks, and Dr. Pamela Crawford. I reviewed a taped interview of Mr. Neuman by Dr. Crawford recorded in 2011. I reviewed treatment records from Lori Jerkovich, a family therapist, Mr. Newman's jail and other facility mental health records, a taped interview of Mr. Neuman with the Dunwoody Police, a taped interview of Mr. Newman's ex-wife by police, a taped interview with Ms. Orna Hannison, Mr. Jim Vano, GE employees, Mr. Alan Shackley, Al Harris, Anna Bazzi, Jerry Morton, Alice Roberts, Michael Farnham, Carmen Harding. I reviewed interview tape with Mr. Jan De Silva and Melanie White and Christy Oliveira, and several email communications between Mr. Neuman and Ms. Andrea Sneiderman, Karen Stanfield, and Melanie White.
And did you review those records before or after you saw Mr. Neuman?
All of these were reviewed before I interviewed Mr. Neuman.
Before you interviewed. When did you evaluate the defendant?
I saw Mr. Neuman with Dr. Browning on June 30th, 2016, for around 3.5 hours at the DeKalb County Jail.
Who's Dr. Browning?
Dr. Joseph Browning is a forensic psychiatrist I work with. It's standard practice in my department to use 2 evaluators in more significant cases.
Okay. And you testify that your field of expertise is forensic psychology?
That is correct.
Okay. And is Dr. Browning's expertise in forensic psychiatry?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So 3.5 hours with the defendant on what date?
That was June 30th?
Was anybody else present?
No.
Did you tell the defendant at that time what the purpose of your being there was?
Correct. Before I begin an interview for a forensic psychological evaluation, I always review an advisory notice with the individual. I cover with them the purpose for the evaluation, what the court order has asked that I review. I explain that nothing they say or do could be held in confidence, that I may have to testify in court.
Why do you explain that to the individuals that you evaluate, that what they say to you is not covered by any confidentiality?
I need to make sure that they understand they're waiving their rights not to self-incriminate at the time of the evaluation.
Okay. What else?
I review with them that I sent a report to the court that is copied to all parties, and that the evaluation is not confidential.
Okay. During the period of time when you were with the defendant, were you observing him?
I was.
How close were you to him?
We were sitting at a table approximately the size of this bench, so across from each other.
And what were you looking for?
Well, when I observe someone during an evaluation, I conduct what is called a middle status examination. That is an examination of the person's cognition, behavior, attitude. So I look at how they communicate, how well they pay attention, how well they concentrate. I review their general fund of knowledge. I look at whether or not they have abstract skills, if they have decisional capacity to cooperate with the evaluation. I look at their demeanor, how they're dressed, how they act, how they speak. These are all relevant in formulating a diagnosis.
Okay. Did you perform any tests, any psychological tests on the defendant at the time that you evaluated him in June 2016?
No.
How come?
Well, the purpose of the evaluation was to understand his mental state at the time of the crime. No psychological test administered today will tell me his mental state a number of years ago. He previously had testing from another evaluator, so repeating a test would not be useful.
Who was that other evaluator?
Dr. Adriana Flores.
All right. And did you have that testing data?
I have her raw data, yes.
Let me ask you a question, Dr. Huey. What's typical in when performed? Have you yourself administered psychological tests to individuals?
Several thousand.
Several thousand times?
Yes.
Okay. And when you administer psychological tests to individuals, is it typical or not typical to have formed your opinion before you do the testing?
That would be atypical. An opinion is based on an assimilation of all available data. So if I'm going to do psychological testing, that would be data. I might have a general hypothesis in mind after conducting an interview or reading a document, but if I'm doing testing, I would need to integrate that into my opinion.
Okay. When you talked to the defendant, did you ask him about the crime he was accused of committing?
Yes,
Did he have a memory of the crime he was accused of committing?
he did.
Did he have a detailed recollection of the crime he is accused of committing?
He detailed his actions prior to and during and after the events.
What did the defendant tell you about his actions and his behaviors the day of the crime? And the day of the crime, what do you know the day of the crime to be?
That was November 18th, 2010.
November 18th. And when we say the crime, what do you know the crime the defendant is accused of to be?
Murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony.
Okay. And what did the defendant tell you about his actions the day of November 18th, 2010?
He told me that he went into work early that day, around 5:30. He said that he responded to emails, that he programmed some emails to be forwarded while he was away from the office. He said that he had rented a van the day prior and that he had rented a hotel room and obtained a disguise, a beard and other items. He said he went to the hotel room, that he put on the disguise, that he drove to the Sneiderman home. He said he followed Mr. Sneiderman to the daycare center, that he shot Mr. Sneiderman, that he then drove back to the hotel, took off his disguise, turned in the rental car, and went back to work where he met with employees.
When the defendant was telling you the description of what he did and the actions he took leading up to committing the crime and then leaving the murder scene, did he make sense to you? Was he coherent?
He was coherent.
Was there anything remarkable to you about the way he told you his version of events?
His speech was normal, goal-directed, no pressure, no flight of ideas, no unusual thoughts.
Did the defendant describe to you any hallucinations on the day of the crime?
None.
Did the defendant describe to you any delusions he was experiencing on the day of the crime?
No.
Did you talk to the defendant about being interviewed by the police?
I did.
And you said you reviewed that interview tape yourself?
I watched the entire tape.
It was a very long tape?
It was a long tape, yes.
Okay. Did the defendant, what, if anything, did the defendant tell you about that interview with the police?
Well, when I asked him why he didn't tell the police about the beliefs he had told me that he had, he said that when he was contacted by the police and went for the interview, he was only aware that they knew that he had rented a van, and he didn't think that it would be relevant to tell them anything more.
Are you aware that the defendant denied committing the crime at the time you talked to the police?
Yes.
Are you aware that the defendant denied owning a gun at the time you talked to the police?
Yes.
And you're of course aware that the defendant denied shooting the victim at the time?
Yes.
All right, so after speaking with the defendant, what then did you do? Did you formulate a report in this case?
Well, after speaking with Mr. Neuman and reviewing all the information, I did request some additional information after that. Therapy notes from a Dr. Warsaw, who Mr. Neuman saw with his wife. It was his ex-wife's counselor that he saw a few sessions with. I wanted to look through those notes again to see if there was evidence of a mental disorder around the time he was talking with that doctor.
Dr. Huey, did you review any information that led you to the conclusion that the defendant was delusional on the day of the crime?
I found no evidence of a delusion on the day of the crime.
Did you find any evidence that you reviewed that the defendant was suffering from the symptoms of a major mental illness on the day of the crime?
I did not find evidence of a major mental disorder on the day of the crime.
And what led you to that conclusion?
Well, his actions were methodical and deliberate. A person, if they had bipolar mania, could not methodically go to work and respond to emails and program emails to be sent while they were away and follow through with a plan that had been thought out over the course of months and go back to the office, and then all of the employees who interacted with him that day said he seemed normal.
What about that is inconsistent with someone who is experiencing the symptoms of bipolar 1 or psychosis?
If people had bipolar 1, as I mentioned, they could not pay attention. They would be distracted. They would be driving fast or erratic. They would draw attention to themselves. None of that was documented in the evidence that I located.
What evidence, if any, did you review that suggested or indicated to you that the defendant did not know right from wrong on the day of the murder?
Well, people who do not know right from wrong, that I have evaluated in the past and who have been admitted to the hospital, as I was saying, at the time of the crime, take no actions to disguise themselves or to conceal information from the police. Most I have interviewed at the hospital who have been insane at the time of the crime say they waited for the police to tell them about their delusion. Look, I just saved the world from something bad happening.
Did the defendant describe to you, we've been talking so far about the defendant's behavior on the day of the crime and the other material that you reviewed. Did the defendant tell you anything about whether he was suffering a delusion or had hallucinations prior to the crime?
He told me that he had a history of seeing a demon and an angel, and that he had heard the demon and the angel speak to him.
Did the defendant tell you any information that he was experiencing those hallucinative symptoms on the day of the crime?
He did not mention these on the day of the offense.
Did you reach a conclusion, doctor, about the defendant's mental state?
I did.
Explain to the jurors what's malingering.
Malingering is the deliberate fabrication or exaggeration of psychiatric or physical symptoms for the person of secondary gain. Secondary gain could be something like evading criminal prosecution or in a civil litigation to obtain disability without a just cause.
What, if anything, is your opinion about the defendant and malingering in this case?
It is my opinion that he was malingering symptoms of a psychosis.
What led you to that conclusion?
Well, several things. He described the demon as appearing as huge, as a really large demon.
He described it to you that way?
Yes.
Okay.
With facial features he could not recognize. We know from extensive research that people with a legitimate mental illness who have visual hallucinations only see normal-sized people. The only exception is someone with a toxic brain syndrome who might see someone who is large or tall. That may be associated with a brain lesion or an alcohol dementia, but certainly not with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder.
Okay, so nothing that would be relative to any issue raised by the defendant's medical history or presentation?
That is correct.
Okay. So the way he described the demon, have you spoken with, or in your practice, have you experienced individuals who have audio or visual hallucinations?
Numerous times.
Okay. And what, if anything, about the defendant's description of seeing the demon was influenced your opinion that he was malingering?
Well, the size of the demon. He said it was large. It was towering over him. Again, visual hallucinations are of normal-sized people. He said that the face was nondescript. People see these vividly when they have visual hallucinations due to a mental illness.
All right. What else? Is there anything else in his description of the delusions or the hallucinations or the voices that he described to you? What else has influenced your opinion that he is, in fact, malingering symptoms of psychosis?
The other thing that was striking is the fact that his description of his vision of the angel changed. When I reviewed the tape with Dr. Crawford, he told her that the angel was also large and towering.
Let me stop you there for 1 second. Dr. Crawford, do you know when it was that Dr. Crawford interviewed the defendant and he gave this description?
Yes, that was in fall of 2011.
Okay, back in 2011. All right, and that was a videotape that you reviewed?
Correct.
Okay. And so did you compare what the description of the angel that the defendant gave Dr. Crawford in 2011 with the description he gave you in June of 2016?
I did.
And what was different about those descriptions?
He said that the angel was normal-sized when I interviewed him this year. He also had told Dr. Crawford that he could feel the angel. That would be something called a tactile hallucination. Tactile hallucinations are extremely rare. We would only usually only see those in people with an organic brain syndrome, not with a functional psychosis such as with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. He said he did not feel the angel when I asked him specifically about that in June.
Well, what, if anything, does that mean to you that the, well, first of all, let me ask you about tactile. You said tactile, but I'm not sure that I understand what you mean about tactile when we're talking about a hallucination, his description of the angel. What are you talking about?
That means that he said he could actually feel the angel. He could feel the softness of her robes. Okay. And that is highly atypical. The fact that his story changed at 2 different points in time was relevant in making the diagnosis of malingering, because inconsistencies in the story is one of the criteria we use in looking at malingering.
Why is that significant to you?
Well, the fact that he proclaimed that this aberration, this hallucination of an angel, drove him to take someone's life is a highly significant thing. And regardless of how much time has passed, I cannot imagine someone forgetting the detail of what they remembered. It's kind of like we all remember what we wore to the high school prom, although we may not know what we wore to work last week.
When the defendant was telling you about the demon he saw, how far back in his life was he going to describe this event? You talked to him in 2016. What part of his life was he telling you about when he told you he first encountered this demon?
He claimed he first saw the demon around age 13 when he was at a boarding school in Israel.
Okay, and that would have been, how old was Mr. Neuman when you saw him?
He was 54, 53, so that would have been
so when he was
40 years ago.
I'm sorry?
40 years ago.
40 years prior?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Was his description of the demon consistent among all of the different interviews that you reviewed and what he told you?
There were some changes in the demon, such as the facial features and the recognition. The voice, he told me that the voice was deep and manly, and the interview with Dr. Crawford, he said the voice sounded like Barry White.
Was that prompted by Dr. Crawford? She asked him what the voice sounded like?
Yes.
Okay. And he said Barry White?
Yes.
Okay.
And I also asked him what the voice sounded like, and he said deep, manly voice.
He said a deep, manly voice?
Yes.
He didn't say Barry White again?
No.
What about a description of the angel? Did he give any inconsistent descriptions of the angel among the several interviews that you had access to?
Yes. In addition to the changes in her physical characteristics, he had told Dr. Crawford that the angel sounded like Olivia Newton-John. He just said that she had a soft voice.
That's what he described to you?
Yes.
Anything else significant to you in your review of the materials and reaching your decision that the defendant, your opinion that the defendant was malingering symptoms?
Those were the main points.
Those were the main points. Did you review any evidence that led you to believe that the defendant was experiencing a delusion? He was experiencing delusions at the time of the crime.
I looked for evidence of delusions given his report that he said the demon had told him in the past to join him or to be with him. I asked him what that meant. He said he didn't know what the voice meant by saying to go with him or be with him. At times he had thought of suicide because of hearing that voice. And regarding the angel, he said that when I talked with him, he said that she told him, first of all, that the Sneiderman children were his, and then later that he was instructed to protect the children. That was in contrast to what he told Dr. Crawford, where he said that the voice told him to kill Mr. Sneiderman as a way to protect the children.
What, if anything, does that mean to you, that his description of what the angel said to him with reference to either killing Rusty Sneiderman or protecting the children, what, if any, significance does that have to you?
Well, again, there is the inconsistency. Something as powerful as a hallucination telling you to take a human life is not something you're going to forget over time. Those details would be stuck in your memory.
Dr. Huey, did you, in your review of any material, find that pre-murder, before November 18, 2010, the defendant had ever been diagnosed with any mental illness at all?
No diagnosis prior to being seen at the jail by the defense experts.
Who, to your knowledge, in your review, was the first individual to diagnosed this defendant with a mental illness?
Based on the timeline, that would be Dr. Flores.
How at all does this factor into your determination that the defendant has lingering symptoms of serious mental illness?
Well, in the definition of malingering that I described to you, it's not just the fabrication or exaggeration of symptoms, it is for the purpose of secondary gain, such as evading criminal prosecution. Mr. Neuman was arrested in January 2011, and this report to mental health professionals does not occur until September. That's a significant time lapse with no evidence of these symptoms while he was in jail.
No evidence of symptoms while he was in jail. Does that mean prior to the time that Dr. Flores talked to him?
Yes.
Do you know that to be September 2011?
That's what I was reading the report, yes.
Okay. And you've had access to all the medical records, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you review medical records for the defendant from January 2011 until September 2011?
I did.
And what, if anything, did you find in those records about the defendant having symptoms of serious mental illness?
Well, the jail mental health staff did not diagnose him with any mental illness. When he was admitted to the jail, he was screened by a nurse the following day. A checklist questionnaire showed that he denied hearing voices, he denied having unusual beliefs. His mental status was normal. There were no abnormalities of speech or thinking that were noted. Then in October 2011, I think it was, he reported suicidal ideas and was placed in the jail's mental health infirmary.
When was that?
That was, I believe, in October.
October
2011, when he reported suicidal ideas. And he was
after he spoke to Dr. Flores?
After seeing Dr. Flores.
Okay.
So he was under direct observation. The mental health infirmary at the DeKalb County Jail has officers and nurses who make rounds several times an hour, so he was seen around the clock by the staff. There was no documentation of any abnormalities of mood or thought.
What kind of things would you expect to see from someone who is experiencing auditory or visual hallucinations if they're being watched like that in that kind of environment?
If someone is actively hearing voices or seeing visions, and they do not hear them all the time for several years, they're going to respond to those hallucinations. The same as if we're sitting here and hear a loud noise out there, we're all going to turn and look over there. So they would look in the direction of the delusion, or they would be distracted by what they were hearing. So if I'm talking with them and they're hearing voices, they're not going to hear what I'm saying. They're going to be thinking over here about what the voice is saying.
And did you see any evidence of that in the medical records for this defendant in 2011?
No documentation.
Dr. Huey, what's erotomania?
Erotomania is a type of delusion where someone believes they have a romantic relationship with someone that is beyond what it is.
Did you review the evidence with an eye towards identifying whether this defendant was experiencing any signs of erotomania?
Yes, I read that in Dr. Flores' report, so I looked for evidence of erotomania.
What, if any, evidence did you find that this defendant was experiencing erotomania at any relevant time period?
None.
Is there a difference between a delusion and a firmly held belief?
Well, a delusion is a firmly held belief, but by definition it is held contrary to objective evidence that it may not be true. In this particular case, he said in the interview that unequivocally that he and Mrs. Sneiderman had intercourse on about half a dozen times.
As a physical relationship?
Correct.
He described that to you?
Yes.
Did he seem confused about describing that physical relationship to you?
No. He said there may have been additional times that he fantasized about her, but he said unequivocally that they had intercourse about half a dozen times.
Okay. Is that in any way different from what your review of the previous interviews he gave, the description of their relationship?
Yes. In previous interviews, he was more ambiguous about the relationship, saying that it might have been fantasy. He was not as direct about the actual number of times they may have had sexual contact.
All right. Hey, Dr. Huey, is infatuation a mental disorder?
No.
Is being in love a mental disorder?
Not at all.
If two people are in a mutual romantic relationship Is that the definition of erotomania?
Not at all.
What if one person is more optimistic about the relationship working out than the other person? Is that erotomania?
That's wishful thinking.
How about a misperception of the facts? If somebody believes something is going to happen, hopes it's going to happen, but it just doesn't happen. Is that the same as a delusion?
No.
What's a delusion?
A delusion is a false belief firmly held contrary to evidence against the belief.
What kind of symptoms would you expect to see from this defendant if he had an erotomanic fixation on Andrea Sneiderman? What would you expect to see?
With erotomania, in extreme cases, I see stalking. That's the most common behavior for people with erotomania.
Did you see any evidence that the defendant was stalking Andrea Sneiderman?
No.
What else would you expect to see?
Well, I would expect to see them spend a lot of time pursuing someone contrary to that person's wishes.
Did you see any evidence that the defendant spent a lot of time pursuing Andrea Sneiderman against her wishes?
No. They exchanged numerous emails over the course of time.
Did the defendant describe to you any delusion he purported to have, he said he had, about the Sneiderman children, Andrea Sneiderman's children?
Yes. He said that the angel told him in the summer of 2010, while he was at a dinner party with friends and his wife, that the Sneiderman children were his.
Did he tell you who he was having dinner with?
I don't recall the name of the couple that he was seeing.
What, if anything, did he tell you he did in response to getting the word from the angel that these kids were his?
Well, he said this occurred while his wife and dinner hosts were in the room, and that after he heard the voice, he went into the next room and excused himself and called Mrs. Sneiderman, knowing that she would be going on a business trip to Colorado, to arrange to join her and meet her there.
Now, this version of events that he's telling you, is that consistent with the same way he told this story to Dr. Flores, Dr. Crawford, and people who came before you?
It seems different and similar.
Okay, how's it different and how's it similar?
Well, differences are he told other evaluators at one time that no one else was in the room, and then he said that his wife was in the room. Now all three people are in the room. So the people in the room changed over time.
Was that significant to you?
Well, yes. Again, in diagnosing malingering, people have inconsistencies in their own story, and has changed over the course of time with different evaluators.
After the initial incident when the angel came to him and told him, what did he tell you the angel told him in July 2010?
That the Sneiderman children were his.
Okay. Did the angel tell him he had to go do anything about it?
No.
Okay, that's not what he told you.
Oh, to tell Andrea, yes.
She was supposed to go tell Andrea?
Yes.
Did he do that in his version of events to you?
In his version of the story, no. He chose not to tell Andrea when he met her in Colorado. He changed his mind, and instead of telling her that the children were his, he told her that she could search the world over and not find a better father.
Well, that's not really the same thing, is it?
It is not the same thing.
And he changed his mind about that. That's what he told you?
Yes, he changed his mind about telling her.
About telling her? All right. When someone with genuine mental illness, actually hears voices telling them to do something, is that something they can choose not to do?
Many people with hallucinations do not follow through with a command when they hear a command hallucination.
Is there anything about the way he described this angel talking to him that struck you as either consistent or inconsistent with someone who's genuinely had this kind of hallucination?
Well, again, the changes in description of the angel's appearance, the changes in description of what the angel said, these are inconsistencies that I would use in diagnosing malingering.
Okay. Did he tell you about a second time that this angel is supposed to came back to talk to him?
Yes, he did. He said that in August, after meeting Mr. Sneiderman for the first time, that the angel came to him again and told him that he might hurt the children and he had to protect the children.
Who had to protect the children?
That he said that Mr. Sneiderman might hurt the children and Mr. Neuman needed to protect the children.
Okay, let's jump right there too now. Now, you reviewed various pieces of evidence in the case you told the jury?
Yes.
Do you ever see any little bit of evidence that Mr. Rusty Sneiderman was anything other than a great father?
No.
All right. Did you ever see any evidence that Rusty Sneiderman did anything other than love those kids?
No.
Okay, so there's no serious question of fact that the children were in danger about anything. They clearly were not, right?
That is correct.
Okay. What did the defendant tell you about what he had to do, because this angel came to him and told him those things?
Well, I asked him specifically, did the angel tell you to do anything? And he said, no, the only instruction was to protect the children, and he interpreted that to mean that he needed to kill Mr. Sneiderman. That was contrary to what he told Dr. Crawford.
How is that contrary?
Well, he told Dr. Crawford and Dr. Marks that he was told to kill Mr. Sneiderman by the angel. So there's a difference between the voice telling him to do that and his interpretation of what he thought the voice wanted him to do.
And is just the fact that those things are different, is that what's significant to you, or the fact that at one point he said something much more directed, that the angel directed him to do something violent, as opposed to him interpreting it in that way later?
It's another example of inconsistency that I would use in diagnosing malingering.
May I have 1 moment, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We're back on the record. Yes, ma'am. You may proceed.
Thank you. Hey, Dr. Fury, in the emails that you reviewed, you talked about emails from the defendant to Ms. Sneiderman and to other individuals. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. Did you find any evidence in all of those emails that you reviewed that the defendant referred to Ian Sneiderman as his child?
Not once.
Did you see any evidence in any of those emails that you reviewed that he referred to Sophia Sneiderman directly as his child?
Never.
Did you see any evidence in any of the emails that you reviewed that he considered those children to be in danger in any way?
No.
Is that consistent or inconsistent with somebody who actually has a delusion of the type Mr. Neuman described to you?
That is highly inconsistent. If someone has a belief, delusional or real, that children are in danger, they're going to take immediate steps to try and protect those children. They would talk to the custodial parent, they would call protective services, they would call the police. He's doing none of those things.
Did you, in fact, review any material in the emails or anything else where the defendant did not disclose where you would otherwise think he would, that he had these additional children?
There were numerous examples during countless emails, phone conversations with friends about the affair with Mrs. Sneiderman. He never mentioned a belief that the children were his. In interviews with professionals at the jail and Dr. Warsaw and Ms. Jerkovich, he reported having 3 children, not 5.
Why is that significant? Maybe he just didn't want to tell them. Maybe he knew there was something a little off about it, and he just thought it would be too weird to talk to people. Is that something that someone who's experiencing a true delusion would do?
No. If they believe that the children are theirs and they have to protect them, they would take steps to protect them the same as a parent would protect their child.
Would that person who's really experiencing a delusion be selective in who he told about it?
Not likely.
Did you review any communication between the defendant and the victim in the case, Rusty Sneiderman?
Yes.
What kind of communication did you review?
Email.
Email communication between them?
Correct.
In reviewing the email communication between the defendant and the victim, can you tell the jurors what was the general topic of it, do you recall?
Well, Mr. Neuman was trying to help Mr. Sneiderman find a job or new business ventures. He spoke favorably of Mr. Sneiderman.
Did you note the dates, and I want to ask you specific dates, but the dates of these email exchanges between the defendant and the victim? Were some or all of them before or after the time that the angel came to him and the defendant told you that the angel told him that Rusty was hurting the kids?
These were after he alleged that he heard the voice.
What, if anything, does that say to you about someone who was, is that consistent or inconsistent with someone who was sincerely experiencing a delusion that Rusty Sneiderman was in any way a danger to the defendant's children?
That is highly inconsistent, because if he believed the children were in danger, he would have confronted him, he would have taken steps to protect the children, and instead he's trying to help him get a job.
That's what you expect from someone who's seriously experiencing a delusion like that?
I would expect them to confront the person or to take steps to protect the children.
In the defendant's interview with the police, he also speaks of Mr. Sneiderman in a positive way. Is that something you would expect to see from someone who is truly experiencing the delusion as the defendant described it to you?
No. Again, the people that I've evaluated as being insane at the time of the crime will readily talk to the police about their delusions because they think they did something right. If they have no knowledge of what they did was wrong, they have nothing to hide.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Huey. I don't have any further questions.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've been going about an hour. This is Deputy Lewis to give you a 10-minute stretch break, and Deputy Lewis has them back in the jury box in 10 minutes.
Knowledge of what they did was wrong, they have nothing to hide.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Huey. I don't have any further questions.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've been going about an hour. This is Deputy Lewis to give you a 10-minute stretch break, and Deputy Lewis has them back in the jury box in 10 minutes.
All rise.